So why do Republicans hate poor people so much?
Right.
Why, if you're supposed to separate church and state, do you allow your Christian beliefs to influence you in that way? Why are Republicans so uncaring about the environment? We can't see God. We don't even know if he's real, but government's real. Why do we put faith in something that's invisible versus something that we know is here and people that are here that we know we can count on to save us?
Yeah. The most dangerous words you could ever hear Ronald Reagan once said is, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." The lesson probably is, and all of us, including me, always want to improve on this, is just to stay very focused on the things that are important. Go do the work, love your family, love your God, and the rest of it will take care of itself.
Welcome, everybody. We are on the OTG podcast number 1, the new podcast for OTG. And we have a special guest here today, the Honorable Senator Eric Schmitt.
Great to be with you.
Thanks for joining us, Eric.
And here, the table that often serves as a family risk table is now repurposed.
This is a table of many functions. Eric's joined us today to really help us to dispel myths, to bring enlightenment to some of the things that go on behind closed doors. And I think probably most importantly, and the question that we got from the OTG community the most was, how do you effectively cross the line between politics and Christianity? I think it was one of the most things they wondered. But before we get into the serious stuff, of course, we have...
It's a lot of pressure, by the way. Those are some big questions.
Big questions. It's not clear right now, some of those questions. We'll get into the myths first I'd like to hit. So since you're a Republican senator, we'll kind of speak from the Republican perspective. So the first question is, why are Republicans so uncaring about the environment?
Yeah, I'm sure I'm probably going to laugh at a lot of these, I'm sure, initially. I don't think that's the issue at all. I think that for me, I care very deeply about the environment and conservation, actually. I think where we're at now, though, is this climate alarmism has become sort of like a pseudo-religion. Ironically, here talk about faith and religion. And I think when you dismiss God from every aspect of public life and you come up with essentially making sacrifices to control the weather, which is what a lot of, I think, on the radical end of all this, which is controlling the agenda. When you talk about carbon emissions in the United States versus China and what people are doing, it gets into this place that is, it's unique in human history, quite frankly. No country in the history of the world has sort of unilaterally declared war on their own energy sources. Countries have gone to war since the beginning of time for natural resources. In the United States, we have all the natural resources we'll ever need. And so for me, I'm kind of an all of the above person, whatever it is. I think what you're seeing now is the government is driving through subsidies this push towards certain kind of energy sources. And ironically, a lot of the materials that you need for that, which is incredibly dirty, by the way, and move jobs to places like China, which if you want to talk about countries that actually are evil regimes that have concentration camps right now, there's genocide against Muslims, Christians are persecuted, it's a communist regime. And so instead of utilizing the natural resources we have here and letting sort of the market decide what people want, we've had this sort of top-down command and control decision making. And so I think that gets flooded into the zone when people talk about the environment. I think Republicans we can do a better job of talking about what we stand for. But the truth of the matter is this agenda that's being pushed by these climate alarmists who want you to believe that the world is going to end in 7 years if you don't repent and get rid of your gas stove. The truth is it hurts the poorest among us the most. And so if you look at sort of the march of human history. You've got a bunch of different, economic revolutions that have happened. Right now is the most prosperous time to be alive, generally speaking. More people have been lifted out of poverty through capitalism than any time in human history. So the point is, I think where you get the disconnect here is when you see people like John Kerry, who's incredibly wealthy, flying on his private jet, whatever the carbon footprint for that is, going to a conference in Europe and telling people all the things that they should live without. It just rings a little hollow. So I think we can be smart, but I also think it's incumbent to sort of dispel a lot of these myths about what's really happening. I think for most people in their daily lives, you can have more people die because they don't have heat, like in places in Europe right now, where they don't have adequate resources for people. You're going to have more people die from that through climate change 200 years from now or something, where the ocean levels rise by 0.2 centimeters. So, but I think if you peel that back, Will, what is the ultimate motivation there? Some people are trying to find meaning, and this is what they've grabbed onto, but also the desire among particularly government officials and the more elites to control. It's a way for them to control your life. And for me, I did not get into politics to aggregate power. For me, it's diffusing it. It's getting it back out to individuals, because I think far too often we think that Washington, D.C. or your state capital is going to have, some grand solution for every problem in the world. And the truth is, most of those are found in our communities, in our families, in the way that we live our lives. And not everybody has to agree on everything to make that happen. But you have to people committed to doing the right thing and serving. And I think that kind of that servant leader mentality we need more of. So that's a long way of answering a question, but it's all very much interrelated.
In summary, there's not a disconnect necessarily about whether you care about the environment or not. It's more about what do we do to maintain, what do we do to steward the environment. There's disagreement on perhaps root cause and potentially solution.
Well, I think, look, I can speak for myself. I want clean air and clean water. I'm a dad, right? Those are things that we should agree on. That was a lot of the conversation for a very, very long time. I think what's different now and gets lumped into this is, again, this sort of cataclysmic prediction that everybody's going to die if we don't stop using your, gas-powered vehicle. I mean, that's nuts. First of all, and even if you accepted the proposition that we can control the weather, and there aren't other much more important factors controlling, because the climate is changing. It's always changing. It has always changed. Temperatures were higher around the time of Christ globally. The climate is always changing. So you try to understand why. That's a fair discussion to have. But as it relates to politics and what people see the role of governments are, even if we accepted that proposition, if the United States did everything, if China and India aren't on board, which they're not, nothing's going to change, right? So what happens then is the United States then puts ourselves at a competitive disadvantage, and it's again for poor people who need clean, reliable, cheap energy, which happens to be the target of a lot of the radical activist ire. I don't think that's fair to working people, because, again, somebody who wrote a white paper who has a, gender studies degree from Harvard thinks they ought to turn off, buy a new electric stove and give up their gas stove, which they can rely upon. So these are the kind of, I think, disconnects that really happen. I think if you really got down to the root of it, people want many of the same things. But I do think there's a really radical element that's entered into this debate now that is about it's really anti-human. These are the same people who don't want people to have kids and think that we're on this population cliff. I'm 48 years old. I was born in 1975. People were saying that in the 1970s and the 1980s, and it's just not true. It's not true. That is not a threat to civilization. We're producing more food than we ever have. Technology, again, is always the answer here. And I think we're going to have cleaner sources of fuel. One of the really interesting developments now is this small modular nuclear reactors. They're much smaller. They're not these big reactors. They're still in development. But if that actually took hold, that's as clean as it can get. Liquefied natural gas, which we have a ton of in this country that Joe Biden has declared war on, that we should be exporting to our friends and allies in Europe is incredibly clean. But these same sort of radical climate alarmists, they don't want that. And why? You have to ask yourself why. It's about control, and they've picked wind and solar as and it's just not as efficient. It doesn't feed into the grid the same way. Therefore, things are more expensive and people have less access. And in cold weather events like we're having right now in the Midwest, which is going to happen, it could be deadly. So I just think you have to have an honest, thoughtful discussion about it. It doesn't always fit into a soundbite. But I think we got to call out this, again, really anti-human, alarmist agenda.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And just so everyone knows, this first segment, I'm going to be ultra biased against you in my questions. I want to be representative of your opposition media. So why do Republicans hate poor people so much?
Right. Not true. I think a lot of these debates get wrapped up in what is the role of the state? What is the role of government? I think a lot of times Democrats will play on these very emotional kind of arguments. But the truth is, you look at, for example, LBJ's Great Society program in the 1960s. He declared war on poverty. You think of the trillions of dollars that have been spent since then. And you look at those original welfare programs, which, if you want to give people credit, well-intended. But in order to receive welfare money, you couldn't be married and you couldn't have a job. So people follow incentives. People are rational economic actors, typically. And so it had the effect of breaking up a lot of families. And if you really want to get to the heart of what allows people to achieve and reach self-actualization, you kind of have Haslow's hierarchy of needs. The first thing is people need to feel safe. You have this kind of pyramid before people get to self-actualization. So you got a lot of steps before you get there. But having, a lot of these things are just truths. Being in a family is very important. Having a job is important. Beyond the things, if you study these kind of happiness quotients, some of it's genetic, about what makes people happy. Some of it's genetic, but a lot of it has to do with, do you feel like you're wanted and needed every day at work? If you're working outside the home or even inside the home, do you get meaning from that? Your faith, your friends. So these things are all outside of the scope of government. But I think that what Democrats often do is characterize the government program as the thing that's going to, save, or pull people out of poverty. It's just not true. There is a role. There's a legitimate safety net that we should have a discussion about. But I don't think that, compassion can be equated to the size of government. That's just not true.
Yeah. So first two answers, I'm hearing a similar theme, which is everyone cares about maybe the same things even. We're concerned about the same things, but maybe disagree on root cause, disagree on solution. It's just like we say with our faith. If you think something is the way to go, you have to test it. And if it works, maybe you should keep going that way. If it doesn't work, how do you put those checks and balances in place that stops things from not working or that don't work from propagating and getting worse and bigger and out of control?
And one of the things too, Will, I think we also in a time, honestly, where we've never had more information at our fingertips, we suffer a lot from historical amnesia. Like, there's really nothing new under the sun. A lot of the things that we're going through or experiencing have been gone through and experienced before. We ought to learn as much as we can about what happened before us, which can guide decision making. I mean, the group of people that founded this country, so when you talk about those checks and balances, the founders had a very unique opportunity to start a country from scratch on a continent that was disconnected from all the historical issues that happened in Europe. All those, wars that have been fought, the royal families that would marry into another family to have an ally, and all those things that happened in Europe over the centuries and in other places in the world. This was a brand new start. They could start a new country, and which was unique. And we're the first creedal nation in the history of the world, meaning we're not Americans because Germanic peoples or Italian people, like that's a sort of a blood lineage. This is a country where we believe in an idea. And when you talk about the big debates that are going on in this country, I think that to me is what's most troubling is a disconnect among some who maybe don't even accept that general proposition that we are a country. The mission statement is the Declaration of Independence. That's who we are. And it doesn't matter where you came from. If you believe that, you're an American, which is great. That's something we ought to hold on to. But I think you look, and so before we get into the people who are trying to deconstruct all of that and why, I think it's important for us, and I taught a civics class at St. Louis University in 2018 for 2 semesters because I wanted to get on a college campus. I wanted to better understand what was happening. And what I found is that if we, there's a lot of things that separate us. There's a lot of forces out there that want to pull us apart. The thing that can bring us together, I think, is this belief in the American idea. But we don't teach that as much anymore. We don't really have civics classes in grade school anymore. We don't do as much of that, so we don't focus on the commonality and the belief, again, that, our rights come from God, we're created equal, and that we can pursue happiness, which is a very American idea. But the founders knew that wasn't enough, so we have the Constitution, which provides these structural safeguards, all meant to protect individual liberty. So, separation of powers, legislative, executive, judicial branch, are all meant to sort of guard their own power, and when they do that, you're diffusing power. With the idea is that no one branch or person ever gets too powerful. What is the point of that? So that individual liberty is protected as much as possible. Federalism: the states created the federal government, gave the federal government limited powers. The powers that aren't granted to the federal government are retained by the states. So when people say states are the laboratories of democracy, that's a very important thing, because Texas might try something that Illinois is not trying, that California is not doing, that Missouri is doing, and from that you get better policy. Again, all that is meant to diffuse power. So the founders were students of human history. They understood that these factions and discontent is sewed into our human nature, and you can go all the way back to creation, right? These are things that everybody deals with, but we have a structure in this government meant to protect as much as possible from the sort of unification of all that power in one person into some, kind of cult of personality. Again, to protect individual liberty. Why is that important, and how does that connect with our faith? Because as Christians, we believe in individual souls. We believe that each one of us has a soul, and we have our own path, and we're guided by God. And when you get into other political systems, let's say a communist regime or some sort of Marxist journey they're on, that is not the belief. It's why they take God out of the public square completely, because they replace God with the state. And I think a lot of the big debates that we're having in this country right now are, which side are you on? Do you want the state to have more power over your life, or do you want individuals to have more power in their life? And so from that perspective, I suppose my faith has guided me, but also the role of government and the paramount importance of the individual.
Those are very profound answers, so thank you for those. We've got a big belief in this country, or right or wrong, I don't know if it's a correct belief or not, but let's assume it's correct. There should be a separation of church and state. So why are you, when you talk about some of these policy decisions, you bring up your Christian beliefs a lot. Why, if you're supposed to separate church and state, do you allow your Christian beliefs to influence you in that way?
Well, because again, I believe in the individual. And one of the other things that's very unique about this country that really didn't exist, certainly at the scale here, is this belief of religious tolerance, right? Of religious liberty. And you think a lot of the people who came to this country, early on, the Mayflower Compact, these were religious folks who wanted to practice their religion freely, and they weren't able to do that back in England or in other places around the world. And so that's a really important thing for us to hold on to. And so, you could get into a very deep dive of what's permissible at the state level versus the federal level. But really, what the founders were getting at is they didn't want the government to discriminate against you based on your religious practices and your religious belief. That's it. So the idea that you can't be a religious person serving in government is a total manipulation of what that was all about. And if you read it all about Washington or any of the founders or leaders, many were guided by their faith, and that doesn't mean that everyone in the country is subjected to the catechism or something, right? Like that's not what we're talking about. Having people of faith enter government and try to do the right thing, that's a good thing, in my view. But I think, you've got groups that are the Freedom from Religion Foundation that will go after anybody that's saying, even off campus or something, leading student athletes in prayer, voluntarily. That is like the other end of the spectrum. We're trying to punish people for their political beliefs. And so when I was Attorney General, we fought back against that. Just think people should be able to practice their religion freely. And it doesn't need to be my religion. It doesn't need to be my faith. But I think that's a very important principle in this country.
So you talk a lot about God, but we can't see God. We don't really know if he's here. We don't even know if he's real, but government's real. So why do we put faith in something that's invisible versus something that we know is here and people that are here that we know we can count on to save us?
Yeah. The most dangerous words you could ever hear Ronald Reagan once said is, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." I think these conversations are important because I think people intuitively understand maybe what government should or shouldn't be doing, but I think it's important to articulate it as the founding of this country stated. Each one of us individually is born with these referred to as unalienable rights. You can't take them away from us, right? We're born with them. The ability to speak our mind, defend ourselves, petition our government, practice our religion freely. We believe in this country, government doesn't grant those rights to you. Like, you don't have to go ask the king as a subject, may I please? And I think that's what's revolutionary about America. And it wasn't just we beat back a colonial superpower, the most powerful country in the world, in the history of the world at that time. It's that we said, not only are you doing that, but here's what we believe. And we're writing it down on a piece of paper. And here's how we're going to protect that. And we're writing it down on a piece of paper. It can be amended. The Constitution can be amended, but it's got to be hard to do that, right? Because you don't want to make it easy to take people's rights away. But that's a very important concept. But again, if we believe that, what is the government's role? The government's role is to protect those rights. That's it. So if you think about it that way, we're born with certain rights, speak our mind. The government's job is to make sure your First Amendment right to speak your mind isn't infringed upon. Well, what are we seeing? It's not particularly new. It's relatively new in this country, but government officials wanting to censor what you can say and what you can hear. That's antithetical to who we are as a country. The ability to defend yourself. So that's when you get into these very important and sometimes highly charged conversations about the Second Amendment. Basically, I believe that you have a right to defend your family, and you don't need the government's permission to do that. Practice your faith, which is obviously people listening to this is an important issue for them. I don't need to get a permission slip from my local alderman to go to Mass or to go to whatever service. But what did you see happening during COVID? So COVID, to me, the COVID times crystallized these big debates. So they've been going on for a long time, but think about it, COVID as this big highlighter. All the things we're talking, it's a huge highlighter. So what did the government want you to have to do? Get permission to go to church. Get permission to, as far as your business. They were going to shut you down if you didn't have 6 feet social distancing, which now Fauci's admitted was totally made up out of thin air. The government was going to force you to get a vaccine, which they said was going to prevent you getting COVID and prevent you from transmitting COVID to someone else. That's not true. And they knew it at the time. Trust the government? Maybe not. Not where I'm just skeptical. Maybe it's just I'm a natural contrarian, but I'm very skeptical of those things. And we should be. That's in our DNA as a country. And so again, what did that big debate come around? It's centered, for me, when I was Attorney General, suing school districts for mask mandates and suing the federal government for vaccine mandates. It came down to a very simple proposition, which is that individuals should be able to make those decisions. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Want to get the vaccine, get the vaccine. Don't get the vaccine, don't get the vaccine. The government shouldn't be telling you you have to do those things or you lose your employment or you can't attend school or you can't go to church. I mean, this is nuts. So we're at where we're at. So these are the big important debates of our time. Part of why I feel so honored to be able to get to do what I do, because I believe in it passionately. The people of my state have sent me there to go do it. I was very open and honest about why I was running, what my track record was, and what I wanted to do.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric, for going through the guillotine there.
Yeah. It's all right. Nothing I'm not used to. So
Right. I'm sure you have this all the time, but I've known you a long time. And ever since I've known you, you've always been a guy who I've looked up to, who's been a leader in our family, who's, I always tell the funny story about how when we were kids, like me and my brothers who are about, 5 years younger or so, 5-10 years younger than you, we're running around playing Nerf guns or Legos or something. You're sitting with the adults and like debating politics at their level. Like, it's not just a kid, a 7-year-old kid or whatever that was, a 10-year-old kid, trying to debate. You were like putting them in their place.
They would probably dispute that. But
yeah, right. So this has always been a passion for you. Where does that come from?
I think when I was younger, there were a few things that dominated a lot of my my time and attention. Sports was always very important. Played a lot of sports in high school, even in college, and still to this day is a great release for me, honestly. You can't live and breathe politics all the time. It's like a job. So when I'm home or something, I want to watch the Cardinals, college football, the NFL, whatever. It's a nice distraction for me. So sports was always something, as you know, our family was always really close and always very encouraging. So I was very, very blessed to grow up with my parents and my sisters and cousins, right? Everybody just got along and supported each other. And I think that's really important. But, I'm not sure that ever meant I was going to run for anything, but I think I saw it in an early age, the connection between politics and government and people's lives. For whatever reason, I think probably it had to do with my dad. My dad worked the midnight shift, and so he would be home, basically would sleep during the day, and then he would be up when I would get home from school or practice or something. And he would have on, something political, like Crossfire was a thing on CNN. It's not like now where there's all these different platforms. You had like cable was a thing, but you had the network news, which I would watch. And then you had local news, but then you had like, CNN or something had Crossfire. And so I don't know, for whatever reason, I was drawn to this clash of ideas and making an argument. And I think that probably had something to do with me going to law school too. I felt like the law provided guardrails for people's lives to kind of achieve their dreams. That's how I saw the law. And I also saw politics as this great debate about what opportunities people were going to have and all those things. So probably, just having those conversations with my dad and seeing people like Ronald Reagan and Jack Kemp and people like that growing up in the 1980s when I grew up was involved. I tried to support people that I believed in, who were in it for the right reasons and were aligned with my political beliefs. But I was honestly in my early to in my 20s, was busy, with the career and starting a family and those sorts of things. And my entry in to politics was not anything, certainly didn't plan it that way. I, again, followed it, cared, was interested, but it wasn't really until when Stephen was born, my first son, or my only son, but my first child was born in 2004. And for the next few years, particularly at the end of those few years, was having really like dramatic seizures, had a diagnosis of tuberous sclerosis. And so that, at a relatively young age, I guess, as a parent, you gain a lot of perspective. Like it's a very humbling thing. And I think when you confront something like that, a situation where, we didn't know what that meant for Stephen. And Stephen's 19, nonverbal, a lot of challenges. He's had brain surgery, a lot of stuff. But I think your faith can go in one or two different directions there. And for me, thankfully, it only strengthened my faith. I went back to White House Retreat, which you know well. I had been there in high school at DeSmet. I went to Jesuit high school. The seeds were planted there of service, being a man for others. To be honest, at 15, 16, 17 years old, I'm not sure I took that as seriously as I probably should have, but clearly had an influence on me. And I remember going to White House, and I was probably more interested in, it's for those listening, it's this silent retreat house. The Jesuits run it. It's on the river bluffs in St. Louis County. It's beautiful. But I'm sure when I was that age, I wanted to just get down to the river and mess around as opposed to, contemplate my life. But from that, I went back there, and there was a great priest that was there that I had a chance to visit with, and still to this day I'm very close with, and started to think about things, and what was I supposed to do? Like, is this just me partner at a law firm? It's great, but I just felt like there was more to do, and so I felt like this was a calling for me. This was a way for me to serve, and so I ran for office. I ran for the state senate at a young age in my early 30s and won a seat in St. Louis County. I mean, I didn't know like how it was stacked, but Obama won it by, in that year in 2008, which was a rough year to be a Republican, he won by 8, I won by 10. So we were able to, talk to voters and win and do some important things when I was in the state senate, reducing taxes, fighting for individuals with disabilities, things that, drew me to public life. And then, ran statewide and won, and then the Senate thing in the last couple of years. So I just am very blessed and fortunate. But my faith has been a central part in all of that. And I think continuing to find connection and meaning is very important to me. And I think my faith is one of the really important anchors in my life. I don't really view myself in a way of like, United States Senator. I'm Eric, and you're my cousin, and I like to go to Cardinal games, and but you are now in rooms where you're United States Senator. You have a very important role to play. But I think that humility, which is really important, comes a lot from my faith and understanding there's a lot more important things in life, and the kind of person you are and how you treat other people than some of the titles and those things that come along with it. And I for me at least, I know that wouldn't be true if I didn't have this deep connection with my faith.
As long as I've known you, and as long as I've known, let me know if this is something you're okay sharing or not. But as long as I've never seen Stephen have a seizure until we did our wrist night, and the intensity of that, and it's kind of like they always say, you can never understand the perspective of someone fully until you've kind of lived it to some degree. And I think there's a lot of that out right now where there's so much judgment and hatred and anger, people that have never met you before, people that have never even, like, it was unbelievable when you were running for Senate. Like I up until this point, I'd always heard everyone just speak so positively about you. And then you run for Senate, and it's like the demons come out, and there are people that I was Facebook friends with, and totally chill people in real life. Like this guy from the dental lab, when I worked at the dental lab, was one of the most loud, negative people on every one of your posts. Yeah. And I was just thinking to myself, like, this guy, I knew this guy. He was quiet. He was chill. He was a really nice guy. But then something about, and he'd never met you before. Right. Like, so it was shocking to me. I was just like, I IM'd him. I was like, Mike, dude, this is my cousin. Can you bring it down a notch? Like, you've never met the guy. It's like, give him a benefit of the doubt for 2 seconds, But I mean, I know it's not just Mike, it's all of us. Yeah. We're kind of in this cesspool of social media, and it brings out the worst in people. I've seen it with our business too, people attacking Christian ads and stuff. And so what do you make of all that? Like, how do you reconcile all that? And then how do you reconcile all that with your faith?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good question, and I've thought about it, especially the more national office. And unless you're running for president, there's no bigger race than a United States Senate race, right? To some people, you become a caricature of the things that they just assume and want to assume the worst. And you have to be at peace with the idea that these folks don't know you. If people want to have an opinion, they don't, like some of the things we talked about, and my response to things during COVID, if you want to disagree with that, that's all fair. People can have a different opinion than me. You can totally disagree. I have friends to this day that, are, identify as Democrats or have different views on particular issues. That to me isn't what our connection with as friends is about. Maybe it's that person was there for me when Stephen was going through some of the worst of the stuff, or like you said, it's hard to explain those things, and being a dad and And I think people that know me, you know, for the most part, I have a favorable view. But you can't control that, I guess is the best way to put it. And so I think you just have to stay focused on what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if I ever feel like I've lost that intentionality or that focus or that mission, it's time to do something else. Because as you mentioned, there's a lot that comes with it. There's a lot of negativity that comes with it, but that's okay. Like, people can have a point of view. I try to not make things personal. It's really about the policy, and I try not to assume intentions as much as I can. But the stakes are high, and I think people, will get pulled into that. But yeah, I think that, and again, why those anchors are really important to me. Like at the end of the day, I am the most important job I have is being Jamie's husband and Steven's dad and Sophia and Olivia's dad. And like taking Olivia to her volleyball tournament in Kansas City and just being able to watch her, I get a lot of joy from that. And that's really important to me. So I think if you put too much of your eggs in a basket of being a US Senator or this successful entrepreneur or whatever it is, that can consume you. And you got to be careful that doesn't become too much of your identity. It's important. It's a very important job. The gravity of it, especially when I'm in these classified briefings, being on the Armed Services Committee, the gravity of the decisions that you make in that role is not lost on me. But I think in order for me to be the best person in that job, it's very important to stay connected to things that really matter in life, your faith and your family and community and those sorts of things. And so, yeah, but, and it's hard, in 180 or 360 or however many characters you can, it's really hard to, and I think, these platforms, all of them are a little bit different, right? Like, and I engage on them because I think it's important to communicate with people who support me, don't support me, about why I'm voting no on something or why I think I owe it to people to be upfront and honest. And that will bring on replies and all that. And I reply to replies sometimes. I'm not afraid of that. And I think if people get an opportunity for you to at least explain your position, they may not agree with you, but they understand where you're coming from. So I try to do that as best I can.
I mean, there's a lot to learn there from all aspects, because I think as Christians, we're often disillusioned with how that goes down. There's people that attack out of nowhere, and you see it at even the higher levels than most. We see it significantly as well. But a lot of times, I think it's almost like those folks, the lack of understanding, the amount of judgment that we're willing to impart on someone who I've never met in my entire life.
Yeah.
It almost just, I think, maybe speaks to the maturity of our social media journey as a civilization. Like, we just haven't figured it out yet. Because I don't know how you judge somebody you've never met.
Right. No, I agree. And also, as for all of us, so much of life is how we react to our environment.
Yes.
If you spend your time letting that weigh you down or, get caught in like a reactive mode all the time, what are you now leaving out of that finite time that you have? You're leaving out then this mission that you have to serve. And if you're all kind of caught up in that, you're not going out and making the case for something or serving your community another way. And so I think that, the lesson probably is, and all of us, including me, always want to improve on this, is just to stay very focused on the things that are important. Go do the work, love your family, love your God, and the rest of it will take care of itself.
All right. So speaking about how we react to our environment, I tend to think there's a mental model behind this. You think about phases of life. It's very much the same. Like, so when you're a baby, you react to everything. I'm hungry, I react. I'm tired, I react. You're just like a stimulus. As you move to toddler, it's a little bit more of, I react negatively when I don't get my way. I react positively when I do. So there's a little bit more distinction. You get in a teenager, I'm mostly skeptical how to react. Maybe I'm a little depressed. I might get anxious. Getting to young adult, maybe I'm starting to react with a little more self-control. Fully realized potential adult, you're in control of your emotions. You don't react as much. Storms are happening. You stay more focused. A lot of us don't get there. Where is the U.S. Senate today?
Babies. It's 100 babies. No, it's a place that, in by design, encourages individual thought in many ways. Like in the house, if you think about it, there's so many house members that you kind of have to act in a pack, right? It's like because it's just about the majority. It's just 50 plus 1. In the Senate, because of the filibuster and other things like requiring unanimous consent, which means no one objects to certain things, you're a lot more of a lone wolf on a lot of things. And for me, that suits me much better because I like the idea of, it's hard for people to put me in a box. And I don't really want to be in a box because my views are not aligned with exactly what every Republican would believe. I like it that way. And so the Senate's a good place for me to be. And you also can create some unusual coalitions. I get to work on a committee. I'm on the Space and Science Subcommittee, which I never would have thought. Like when you're running, like what are some of the things you want to work on? I never thought I'd be on. The Commerce Committee deals with like 50% of the U.S. economy, and then we have oversight over NASA. We have oversight over the commercial space, like Blue Origin, SpaceX, some of the stuff they're doing. It's fascinating. Like I had no idea the stuff that's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years. I mean, they're talking about nuclear propulsion to Mars. They're talking about mining asteroids. So if you think about that, like how significant can that be? Well, maybe you find the stealthiest of stealth materials on an asteroid that changes the course of warfare or civilization. So these and the moon, there's going to be a permanent settlement on the moon, and they can make solar panels out of moon dust. I mean, this stuff's fascinating stuff. So anyway, you can partner up with people on those kinds of things that you don't have these very clear partisan divides on, and I find that really interesting. So if you're intellectually curious, it's a great place to be. I'm honored, but there are a lot of babies, a lot of toddlers, a lot of teenagers, probably a good mix. And I won't go into their names.
Yeah, which one is which?
Well, ask people who I am, maybe more interesting question. But.
Yes. What is President Biden? Don't answer that. Don't answer that.
Don't get me started.
So Eric, you're a baseball fan ever since you were a kid. You played in college, and you had experience here in your first year of Senate that you were pretty excited about. I would describe it as a childlike reaction to what happened. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
It's true. It was pretty cool. When you run, there's a lot of things they tell you and then they don't tell you, and you learn on the fly. Well, early on, I got asked to play in the congressional baseball game. I'm not sure who spotted the fact that I played or something, but anyway, they asked me to play. It's a game that's been played for like 85 years. It's in Nats Park, Major League Stadium. It's a real baseball game. It's not a softball game. It's a real baseball game. And you start practice in mid-March when it's cold out, and you practice. There's a training facility you get to go and practice and take BP and judge fly balls for the first time. I haven't judged fly ball in a long time. But it was awesome, and you get to meet a lot of people. It's mostly House members because the average age in the Senate is like 68 years old. So being 48, you kind of bring that number down a little bit. And so there's only two senators playing. So yeah, you practice, and then there's the game. So the game was in June, and my family all came up, and they had me playing left field. They had me batting cleanup, which was a lot of pressure. There's 30,000 people there. You should come up. It's pretty cool.
I will.
It was cool. It's under the lights. First at bat, 4 straight pitches I walked. Second at bat, had kind of a sort of a bloop single, but was on base, but not a lot of pitches to hit. I didn't think I saw a strike. And so then in my third at bat come up, bases loaded. I figured he was going to have to throw me something over the plate because the bases were already loaded. And so got a fastball over the middle of the plate.
About Eric Schmitt playing in his first game, and now we see an example as he hits a fly ball into left field, over the head this time of Mullen. It'll roll all the way to the wall. That might clear the bases. 3 runs are going to score. That's a triple for Eric Schmitt. And the blowout is on. The GOP running roughshod over DeLuzio and the Democrats.
Drove it to left center field, stand-up triple. I was out of breath, definitely out of breath. So yeah, that might be my highlight. I did the pepper grinder, which the Cardinals were doing, meaning they're grinding it out, right? But nobody knew what that was. I just did it because I was like, I'm a Cardinals fan. Whatever team you want to wear, you wear their hat out there. It's a whole deal. So I'm actually looking forward to it. It inspired me, actually, partially, to get into better shape now. So I'm in better shape than I was even in June.
It's hard to stay in shape when you get older, man. So.
It is, but I think you're right. You dedicate the time, but anyway, it was awesome. It was fun, and for a while the practices are at 5:45 in the morning. That's Eastern time, so that's 4:45 in Missouri.
Yeah.
It's early, but it was fun. It was worth it.
Cool. So you mentioned Risk as something we play on this table, and it's a game of global domination. So do you have plans for global domination then?
I don't. I only want peace, Will. I just want peace. Now, you've claimed that you want peace too, but I found that that's just a piece of this country and a piece of that country and a piece of this country. But I only want peace, and there's different strategies, whether it's the North America strategy or the Australia strategy. But, we play that as a family. It's a lot of fun. It takes forever. So you have to block out 6 hours, but it's a lot of fun. But no desires of global domination, just merely protecting America first.
Blow off some steam, kill some armies on Risk board. That's the only place for war. That's the only place for war, right? Good. Well, thanks for joining, Eric. It was a pleasure having you on, man. I'm glad we got a chance to dig into some of the details of you and who you are and what you're about. And I think you bring, a man of the people to the Senate. I'm really excited to see what you do.
Thanks, man. And you've got a great group listening to this, and it was a pleasure. It was fun.